DLT-based trading and settlement system drastically affect banking institutions, congressmen, wholesale CBDCs, so your money becomes...
Let's forget about crypto, Bitcoin, blue chips classification. Now moving a bit into the regulatory frameworks. Both of us, we're not lawyers, but we read a lot about regulation within crypto, and we try to push as hard as possible on that. Definitely you way more than me, and you have like a bit of depth understanding. If you want to differentiate in a very superficial way between DLT Pilot Regime and MiCA, how we can explain it?
So MiCA is the market in crypto asset, and then MiCA regulatory framework, right? And then the DLT pilot regime is effectively a pilot regime pertaining to DLT-based trading and settlement system. The DLT regime is meant to address areas not covered by MiCA, and notably is meant to address how to deal with digitalized financial instruments, transactional aspects. So to me, both are extremely forward-thinking. Both are extremely compelling frameworks. They are effectively complementing each other. Could they eventually merge into one big framework? Possible. Could they remain separated frameworks? Yes, I'm actually in favor of the latter because I think it gives more flexibility to policymakers to amend specific parts of a regulatory framework when the regulatory framework is kind of like not, a behemoth trying to be all-encompassing. The DLT pilot regime, which will become the DLT regime, to me is doing something exceptional because it's a regulatory push for financial institutions to figure out how to trade financial assets entirely on a blockchain system. A regulatory push. I mean, it's astonishing, right? And effectively 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago now, European regulators effectively said that in their opinion, the future of financial asset transactions would have to be on blockchain.
Nice.
They see it as a significant reduction in systemic risk for financial markets. They see it as a key driver of increasing financial market efficacy in a number of asset classes. When they initiated the DLT pilot regime, they initiated it with private chains. And then a year later, they came back with another statement saying, okay, we actually think that public blockchains are the way to go because open source allows to significantly compress development costs.
Exactly.
But open source also allows you to drive trust. And in financial services, trust is very key, right? If we are effectively opposing parties to a transaction and a new tool comes in place, we both need to trust that the tool is not negatively treating us. And open source, of course, comes with cybersecurity concerns, right? We know that open source repositories are the #1 surface of attack today.
Exactly.
But when you have open source coupled with immutability, you actually absolve a decent amount of the cybersecurity concern because you could say, look, someone is going to go and insert malevolent code into the code base. Okay, well, it only gets pushed into my smart contract if I decide to update my smart contract or if I decide to substitute my smart contract by the new one. So I have several layers, right, of testing of a new process or effectively migration to do versus a very simple pip upgrade happening today, for example, out of Python open source library. So yeah, DLT pilot regime to me is one topic where we're going to see a lot going into production this year already.
Delving deeper into the DLT part, the regime, if there's an asset manager, trader, or a quant guy just hearing us today, how would they categorize their operations? Because under this regime, we have like the trading, the settlement, or both of them combined. How would you say they should think of it? How they should approach it?
Combining trading and settlement into a single platform reduces the number of intermediaries. Does it drastically affect your profit line or your cost line?
Yep.
Not necessarily. Does it speed up time to market? Very likely, especially in certain asset classes. Does it facilitate effectively business continuity in terms of how many number of relationships do you need to maintain? How many pieces of technology do you need to maintain? Right? It simplifies. Now, obviously, from the standpoint of the DLT TSS, the requirements for you to be both trading and settlement are significantly higher than if you're either. Of all the companies I'm aware of building in the context of the DLT pilot regime, I know of only 2 who are looking at both trading and settlement. Of those 2, one is 2 to 3 years ahead of anyone else.
Oh, nice. Nice. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I'm thinking about this, I would classify CME as both of them combined. However, DTCC as just TSS. What do you think about this example?
Yep.
Makes sense, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And what do you think the effectiveness of this regime? Is it like something that it's going to have significant impact in the market, or like just like another pilot that's going to?
No. So that pilot will not be a pilot.
Interesting. Yeah. It's going to be the stepping stone.
This is going in production at full scale.
Interesting.
And this was clarified actually this week in Europe by the regulators. So this is not just yet another pilot. This is going in production. Right? Nice. And this is going to be absolutely transformative for capital markets.
Nice.
The simplifications in pre-trade, trade, and post-trade, right, are going to be drastic. The ability to therefore list assets that today you cannot list because it's too hard to fully handle in the context of a public listing exists some of the products we invest in today, right? We trade today. So that's going to be extremely significant. So I suspect a drastic increase in liquidity for everything today that's effectively not blue chip stocks and blue chip derivatives. I expect the creation of secondary market for what today does not have secondary market, so private assets.
Yep.
And private assets is not a pocket of financial assets. Most assets in the world are private. Most assets in the world are not listed, do not have secondary market, right? So this is why, to me, the DLT pilot regime is nothing short of revolutionary. And my expectation at a 5, maybe 7-year horizon is that main financial exchanges in the world, NYSE, LSEG, NASDAQ, will be running on a DLT TSS in the backend. I expect too that there will be effectively new exchanges getting created that will be native to that regime and will be effectively taking over the market in, for example, private assets.
Nice. Moving from Europe all the way to the US, where we are even based. So how would you assess the current framework? Be it like, let's forget about crypto, Bitcoin, blue chips classification. We don't want to talk about this. More as blockchain, be it like an enablement technology for financial institutions. Yep. Where do we see the regulatory framework on that aspect? I mean, we already have and other like private blockchain, permission blockchain in process, and they're already working. But like, more on broader essence, where do we see this market as regulatory framework heading?
Yeah, so very quickly, very complex,
Exactly.
and beyond my expertise, right? But a few points worth flagging. So first, some parts of financial services today, you could go and run entirely on blockchain.
Yep.
Without the law requiring modifications.
Yep.
Right? That's typically truer in private markets versus public markets, and it's typically truer on the debt capital market side of things versus equity capital market side of things. Part of that has to do with how young or how old the corresponding asset classes are, and therefore when the corresponding laws were created.
Yep.
So equity laws, generally speaking, are much older than fixed income laws. Because they are much older, the overall regulatory system under which they were produced was not at the same degree of separation of duties and responsibilities and maturity. So for example, when you want to modify certain aspects of the equity laws, you have to go through Congress. To modify similar aspects of fixed income law, you do not need to go through Congress, right? And suddenly you have a much easier process. Because the law is also younger, notably in fixed income, the awareness of technology in the context of how the law was written was better. And so you have specific articles. The way they are written is such that they are basically agnostic to the technological means that are used. This is why you have, for example, banking institutions today processing payment for their clients using a closed source blockchain ledger with smart contracts.
Yep.
They didn't get an exception on the law. The law applies. So that's important to have in mind. Now, the second thing that's important to have in mind is that, as you said, let's forget crypto for a moment. Crypto and blockchain are not the same thing.
Yep.
Crypto is a use case of blockchain. You have many use cases of blockchain which are not crypto. But with the political climate we have in the US and we've been having for a few years, and I'm not just talking about the SEC chairman, a handful of senators, some congressmen also fall into that category of being opposed to crypto and colluding blockchain with crypto. And I think in some cases, voluntarily colluding the two, and in some cases, involuntarily colluding the two. But this is not helping with moving the regulatory framework forward, right? Because when you talk about a blockchain, whether it's a L1 or a L2, as a core piece of infrastructure, and you say, look, using this as effectively a shared immutable database of records, and then using nodes to validate transactions and using smart contracts to push whatever form of instruction, you're talking infrastructure. They will tell you, oh, but there is a token. The token is a security, and there are scammers using it. There are scammers using the US dollar. There are probably scammers running AWS instances.
Yep.
But see, this is where the confusion between the two, I think, is really hindering the debate. And then you have political agendas, right? Bringing this in the context of re-election, etc. And so, to me, the US is way behind Europe, UK, Switzerland, Singapore, Middle East, in terms of regulatory approach. And not only they are significantly behind, but even the way they engage with the blockchain ecosystem is significantly behind. Very adversarial, rejecting speaking at conferences, rejecting providing opinions on draft proposals from crypto or blockchain projects, regulation by enforcement. Today, White House vetoing Congress resolution that push back on a effectively SEC rule that makes it prohibitively expensive for a financial institution to provide custody services on crypto.
Wow.
Right? And it's like, hold on, you are so against crypto that you basically want to make sure that no one could provide compelling custody for it. But then at the same time, you're telling me that the reason why you would veto this rejection of the SEC rule is because it's to protect the consumer. I'm like, as far as I know, a regulated custodian is the best way to protect a consumer who wants to get involved in an asset class.
Yep.
You know? So it's a real mess here. I think, unfortunately, it's going to continue, notably this year, given it's election year. You could see a status quo next year if there is a change in administration, right? Or if there is a change in majority at either Senate or House. So not helping with retaining talent, not helping with pushing things in production from the startup side of things. I think from the standpoint of institutions, they already have the expertise, they already have access. What they want to push to production when it comes to blockchain enablement, they can.
Yep.
And they are doing it, and they will continue doing it. But for many startups, unless you have that extremely strong network inside TradFi at a regulatory level, buy side, sell side, PSPs, unless you have experience working at a senior level in those firms, you're having a hard time.
Exactly. Now let's move into a topic that have been like surfing for a while. CBDCs. You always, like for the last few years, heard about just CBDCs, but today we are hearing more about retail versus wholesale CBDCs. What about it? Why should we care? And what's your opinion on it?
So let's put that back in the context of how money is structured today in most countries.
Exactly.
Right? Because I think this is also where a lot of misunderstandings come from. Money in most countries today is a two-tier money system. You have wholesale currency between the central bank and the financial institutions in that country who have an account at the central bank. And then you have retail currency between those institutions and basically everybody else in the country. Europe, US, like that's how we are. That's how most of the world is. A CBDC is a currency issued by the central bank, literally by definition. So now when we start talking about wholesale versus retail CBDC, we're saying, okay, so wholesale CBDC is just a substitute of existing wholesale currency by just a different backend, right? That backend brings more scalability. That backend brings more efficiency. That backend brings more utility. You have higher programmability, higher degree of automation. So your money becomes effectively, right, much more usable at much bigger scale and effectively at much lower cost. Keep in mind that the wholesale currency system today is essentially technology that's at least 50-year-old. And then when you talk about retail CBDC, you're effectively saying that now you no longer have strictly a two-tier money system where retail currency is issued by financial institutions and you never have a direct interfacing of central banks with end users. You're saying actually, no, in this case, the central bank will directly face end users. So in that, there are a few angles, right? The obvious angle that people have is privacy, right? I don't want a central bank to see everything I'm doing. And I think it's become front and center, of course, in mainland China, given that they've released in production a retail CBDC with the digital renminbi. It's also been at the center of many conversations in Europe and in the US as central banks effectively prototype CBDCs and start thinking about pilots and potential deployments. Privacy is not the only issue, right, when you're thinking about retail CBDC. There is also a question of resilience of your money system.
Yep.
Do you still retain a two-tier money, so you have a wholesale and a retail CBDC, Or are you creating a retail CBDC that everybody touches, the financial institutions and the end users? That's different architecting. It is much easier to migrate to a new technology that retains the two-tier system versus migrating the technology and completely refactoring the money system. Moving to a single tier money system also comes with much higher security risk in terms of isolation of financial institutions versus end users, in terms of protection of effectively financial market operations that today take place at the wholesale level. So my view is that we will retain the two-tier money system.
Yep.
My strong preference and conviction is that in that two-tier money system, CBDC will remain at the wholesale level in most countries. I could see countries with specific political regimes. I could see really small countries moving to a one-tier money system that's a retail CBDC for everyone, right? But for most countries, I would expect two-tier, wholesale CBDC, and then retail stablecoin effectively. Now, when I say stablecoin, I want to be very clear. To me, a stablecoin is not saying USDC or USDT, right? It's just talking about a on-chain implementation of retail currency.
Yep.
Right? You have different ways of building it. USDC is one way. JP Morgan tokenized deposit is another way. They are all stablecoins. I personally believe that tokenized deposits will be the way to go at scale. I'm not saying USDC or USDT will disappear, but at scale, tokenized deposits, in my view, will dominate, simply because when you tokenize deposits, you are not altering the liquidity availability profile. While when you are collateralizing with treasury bill, treasury note instruments at scale, you would be completely distorting the liquidity profile in that market, and you don't want that to happen. I mean, that would be absolutely catastrophic.
I mean, I always have a hard time to see like the USDC or like DAI or whatever of the world taking place in intrabank, because, for example, repo markets are in the US are $1.5 trillion per day overnight markets. So and you have like just USDC on self market cap tens of billions, which is nothing compared. Like, I know like the liquidity is a major point. Now to the last section, we'll play a very quick game. I will tell you like 6 to 7 words, and I need like literally one word. The first word comes to your head. Okay, let's start. This is the last section. If I tell you eigenlayer, one word.
I need 2 words: collateral rehypothecation.
Deepen.
Which one?
Deepen.
Promising.
Interesting. Permissioned blockchains.
Past.
DAO.
Cute.
SEC.
Behind.
Solana.
Solana?
Yep.
The beach nearby. No, but no, look, it's good.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for your time. I'm always having good time listening to you.
All right. Always a pleasure. There is always a lot to talk about.
Exactly.
And there will be a lot to talk about.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, that intersection of institutional finance and blockchain has tremendously grown in production, in awareness, and in interest since the 2022 blow up, right, in crypto. I expect it will continue, and you know, it's a fascinating intersection because we haven't seen true revolution in institutional finance for a couple of decades. So to get to live through that, to get to be a part of that, we are lucky.
also the rate, I believe, of adoption is like unprecedented. Like they classified Bitcoin ETF as one of the most highly adopted ETFs over the last years. So I believe this is also one of the promising aspects of it. Okay,
Agreed.
hopefully in the next episode discussing more topics. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye bye.